Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Now, Katan, the nations are angry, and it seems like that anger is about to turn into rage. This week in the news, any hope for peace between Israel and Palestine has been pushed aside, and ISIS continues to expand its control and reign of terror. But first, let's look at the Ukraine situation, which is quickly becoming another example of continual war. President Petro Poroshenko decided not to extend the recent ceasefire. In an interview with RT, Martin Macaulay, a commentator on Russian affairs, believes only a mutual deal between Kiev and anti-government fighters will bring peace to the region.
Mr. Macaulay said, the economy is in a very bad state. He needs peace at this time. He needs to resolve this problem. His task is to ensure peace, to negotiate an agreement, some type of deal whereby both sides, the anti-government forces and the Ukrainian army, cease offensive action so that peace can reign in that area. Then gradually, this area can come back to a normal situation.
Now, foreign affairs analyst Nebojo Malik also commented on the president of Ukraine's decision not to extend the truce in eastern Ukraine. He said, I think President Poroshenko's speech was a warmongering one. He essentially promised a war until the final liberation of eastern Ukraine. And he promised to hunt down all he called bandits and marauders. Now, there was also, he said, not a single conciliation note in it. It's very disappointing from the standpoint of reasonable people. But he said, I don't think for a second that the European Union wasn't expecting this. So they kind of knew already what the president was going to do. They were expecting it.
The EU in on that.
That's right. They were in on it.
Sounds like plans were made in advance. Ukraine's president did say that there still could be a ceasefire if anti-government activists follow his peace plan. Foreign affairs analyst Nebojo Malik was asked if this really is a possibility at this point, and he said, not in the least. His proposal was not a peace plan. It was essentially a demand for unconditional surrender, offering zero guarantees to the people fighting for their self-determination that they would have any of their legitimate demands met by the government in Kiev. There's absolutely no chance for the rebels to take the so-called peace plan into advisement, let alone consideration.
Now, the United States State Department also chimed in on Ukraine's decision, saying whether to extend the ceasefire or not is a decision that Ukraine and only Ukraine will make, and we'd certainly support that decision. Whatever decision that they make. But it takes two to implement a ceasefire. There are steps that we've long been calling for, they said. There are steps that we've long been calling for that are a part of what President Poroshenko has been calling for that Russia has not done. Now, there's a great deal more that they need to do in order to de-escalate the situation, referring back to Russia.
And so the United States State Department is putting a little bit more of this blame on Russia itself.
That's right.
So we see that tit for tat between nations taking place here. I know there's a little tug of war going on between Russia and the United States. Well, as we continue on, at least 15 people were killed after a security checkpoint came under attack just north of Iraq's capital by the group called ISIS. Government forces have been trying to prevent them from gaining ground in the country and in neighboring Syria. As thousands of the militant fighters are being recruited, Western countries in Europe and America are tightening security in fear the terror skills will be brought back home.
Now, a look at social media reveals that people from the West are more involved than you would imagine. A 20-year-old British national posted a photo of what seems to be 15 homemade bombs, accompanied by a tweet saying, "So the UK is afraid I'll come back with the skills I've gained." Now, the same man appears in a video with several others, calling on brothers in the West to join their cause.
Another ISIS fighter in this video reaches out saying, "All my brothers living in the West, I know how you feel in the heart. You feel depressed." Even women are being asked to join in. In April, a 19-year-old nurse was detained at Denver International Airport. She was allegedly on her way to Syria to marry an ISIS fighter. Her Facebook page has suggested that her profession was a slave to Allah.
Experts are saying that this latest recruitment in Western countries is unprecedented. German intelligence claimed that more than 2,000 Europeans have joined the jihad in Syria and Iraq, including at least 320 Germans. Now, American reporter Richard Engel, who was kidnapped and released, says up to 70 Americans are also involved. Now, with these fighters openly saying that they could bring their newly gained terror skills back home, Europe and the United States have reason to be on high alert.
Now, Sunni insurgents trying to catch the country's largest oil refinery prompted the Iraq government to launch several air raids against them. The group has also seized control of other lucrative oil fields across Iraq's border in Syria. The fear is that the oil reserves will allow more external support to flow into their hands.
Gerald Horn, a professor of history, said, "We should not rule out the possibility that these religious extremists can get this oil to the market and receive funding in return. ISIS is very well funded. They were able to loot a bank and apparently run away with tens of millions of dollars for this recent advance that they've made in Iraq."
Yes, from what we understand, that ISIS has been making in these attacks in banks and so forth, taking away hundreds of millions of dollars in addition. You know, this was just one instance, and in fact, their entire network is worth over $2 billion at this time.
A lot,
so
and
they've got the money to purchase their weapons and so forth and continue their offensives. Oil is not the only thing ISIS is going after. Iraq's ambassador has told the UN that the militant group has also seized nuclear materials from Mosul University. At least 40 kilograms of uranium compound were stored at the university. The materials obtained can be used in the manufacturing of weapons of mass destruction, and warned they could be smuggled out of Iraq, which, as we reported on before, they didn't find any materials that could be used for weapons of mass destruction back when the United States went to Iraq several years back, but I guess they missed something.
Well, in another region of the Middle East, the Israeli-Palestinian situation took a turn for the worse when an announcement was made from Israel that the 3 missing Israeli teenagers were found dead. Now, the boys' bodies were found under a pile of rocks in an open field. The 3 boys disappeared while hitchhiking home in the West Bank town of Hebron. All of this led to some extraordinary grief and outrage.
The abductions of the 3 boys prompted one of Israel's largest search and security operations in more than a decade, including help from the FBI. The Palestinian group Hamas was quickly blamed for the abductions, even though they denied it. 400 Palestinians were arrested.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that they were abducted and murdered in cold blood by human animals. Hamas is responsible and Hamas will pay, he said. Now, shortly after these statements, airstrikes were being reported in Gaza.
Seemed like a very great reason to go to war with your neighbor there. Now, as if the tensions between these parties weren't bad enough, a new video emerged showing masked Israeli police brutally beating a teenager in East Jerusalem. The attack was first shown on a Palestinian TV station. The 15-year-old boy was identified as a Palestinian American and was denied medical treatment since taken into custody. He and 5 other youths were attacked in a yard by 2 masked Israeli police.
Now, while funerals for the 3 teens were held the day after finding their bodies, tensions continued to run extremely high between Israel and Hamas, with more airstrikes in Gaza. Now, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is promising that the teenagers' deaths will be avenged, that the people involved in their kidnapping/murder will bear the consequences.
Right. Following these events, Israel has also began calling for its reservists. Now, YPN's Larry McGee has our story on the emotional escalation occurring between the two sides and how retaliation is worsening the situation day after day. Larry, just how many reservist troops have the Israelis called up for this recent event?
Israel has sanctioned the call-up of 1,500 of its reserve troops at present, and as the cycle of retaliation continues to escalate tensions between the Israelis and Palestinians, analysts say there is just cause to be worried as the back and forth could spiral into an all-out war. And speaking on the conflict, editor at Time magazine and CNN host Fareed Zakaria commented this week that on both sides of the conflict, there is an internal compulsion which is pushing them towards a confrontation that maybe they don't rationally want. For Fareed, the present escalation is reminiscent of the events surrounding World War I, where no one rationally wanted a conflict, but nobody could find a way to control their emotions and back down. For that reason, it is difficult for some analysts to see how the present clash is going to stop, as both parties seem dead set on fighting fire with fire. In Gaza, 100 people have been injured, and as many as 11 people are reported to have been killed. Among them, according to the Gaza Ministry of Information, have also been women and children. For this, Hamas says they are prepared for a very long battle. Speaking from Beirut, Hamas spokesperson Osama Hamdan answering concerning the constant rocket fire being launched into Israel by Hamas and what it would take to stop it. Hamdan says Israel must stop its aggression. Israel started the fight and it must stop first. In the meantime, Gaza militants are reported to have up to 10,000 rockets at their disposal and have launched hundreds into Israel so far. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu commented that no country on earth would remain passive in the face of hundreds of rockets fired on its cities, and Israel is no exception. Israel's primary defense at this point against the rockets, which are being fired sometimes 40 at a time, is its Iron Dome defense system, to which U.S. taxpayers have contributed $900 million so far as a part of the $3 billion that the U.S. furnishes to Israel for its army. In addition to the defense of Iron Dome, Israel continues to push offensive measures as well, striking alleged rocket launch sites, production factories, and over 780 other targets, as the cycle of retaliation fueled by uncontrolled emotion continues. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Gatan Jeff, back to you.
Well, as we've seen already so far, continual war only brings more war, no peace. Continuing with the Israeli offensive, the reports continue saying that just over 100 rockets have come in from Gaza, and Israel is not letting up on its strikes on terror targets in the Gaza Strip. In fact, they're planning to ramp up their operation not just to stop the flow of rockets coming from Gaza, but to damage Hamas and its capabilities to send out more rockets. This so far is Israel's third day of Operation Protective Edge.
Now, dozens of militant rockets have been fired at Israel, some as far-reaching as 140 kilometers over Tel Aviv and beyond. Those rockets fired over civilian-populated areas were intercepted by the Iron Dome defense system. Even a wedding was interrupted as air raid sirens went off, sending the bride running for cover. Israel's President Shimon Peres said, if the rocket attacks continue, Israel may launch a ground invasion.
He continued by saying if they would stop, for example, tonight, there won't be any ground entrance. But if they continue, sooner or later, this will be the response. Israel said they will still continue to strike targets inside Gaza, trying to hit rocket launchers, weapon stashes, and command centers, which are so far have been mostly homes that have occupied by Hamas, and they kind of mingle amongst the civilian population there. But they're doing this in order to cripple Hamas, Israel is, in their capacity to wage rocket terrorism. One of Hamas's political leaders, Khalid Mishal, said the Palestinian people will not give in. They will not surrender.
Now, so far, dozens of Palestinians have been killed, including 8 women and 11 children. Israel says that that is doing its best to try to minimize the casualties by using telephone messages and warning shots. Of course, this isn't the first time that Israel and Hamas have fought. Anthony Cordesman from the Center of Strategic and International Studies said, in times past, whatever Hamas lost, it gained back in terms of reputation, rebuilding leaders, and getting more outside support in terms of money and arms, and being able to tighten its control over Gaza. So they're saying even though they may lose in casualties, they're gaining back other ways. So they don't consider it a loss.
Yes, the more you fight against them, the stronger they grow. So far in Israel, there has been no loss of life, while the Palestinians count that loss of life by the hour. Elsewhere in the region, Palestinians hurled rock at Israeli forces while Israel mobilized forces along the border for a possible ground invasion. This time, Israel's message to Hamas is clear. Neither your family or your children will shield you, as it targets the houses of those it believes are responsible for rocket fire. And of course, this becoming one of the defining aspects of the confrontation, this rocket fire continually coming from the Gaza Strip area. Now, this, of course, fueling the anger and the defiance that so often keeps this cycle of violence in motion.
Israel says that they are selective in their targets, and recently Israel's Prime Minister said those attacks will now be stepped up. In Gaza's main hospital, doctors say supplies are already running low, down to only 50% of what they need. This, of course, will impact the number of wounded patients that they are seeing for treatment. One man said, "We hope to stop this attack now, because if it goes on for days, things will be crucial."
Yeah, he's absolutely correct. Now, the M75 rocket that Hamas used in November 2012 to reach Tel Aviv not only had a monument built to honor it, Hamas says that in the last few days they have fired more of these M75 rockets, putting more population centers in Israel under threat.
Now, the president of the Palestinian Unity Government, Mahmoud Abbas, has accused Israel of committing genocide in Gaza. In a recent cabinet meeting, Abbas said of a family that was killed, "This family lost 7 and that family lost 7. The Israelis told them that their home would be demolished by rockets. Now, one was 6 years old," he continued, "one was 70, and all ages in between. They got killed with airstrikes and rockets so that everyone in this house could be demolished." So, what is this crime called? What would we call it legally? He who kills an entire family, isn't this genocide?
Now, that accusation came after Israel stepped up its offensive on the besieged Gaza Strip. Palestinian UN envoy and ambassadors representing Arab, Islamic, and non-aligned nations say they called for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council against what they called Israel's outrageous onslaught against Palestinians, and they're calling for that to take place very soon.
Now, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights says Israel could be violating the laws of war by targeting Palestinian houses in the Gaza Strip. A UN spokesman has said that targeting the homes was a breach of human rights law unless the buildings were used for military purposes. She also said, in case there is any doubt, buildings that are used for ordinary civilian population can't be a legitimate target.
Well, Jeff, what we're seeing here in this latest broadcast is the nations are tit for tat at each other. The emotions are strung very high, and it seems like they are, as Yisrael Hawkins has stated many times before, pointing out the prophecy, continually groping in the dark for answers, but they're not finding a solution. Only the House of Yahweh and Yisrael Hawkins has a solution, the peaceful solution for all mankind's worries, their problems, and truly able to bring peace, but only if we take heed to the warning he is giving and make a change right now. This is what you can do.
Now, to contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. Now, you can email them at info@yahweh.com, and for any calls outside the United States, please call the number on your screen.
Now, don't go anywhere. Stay with us. Get your pencils and papers ready, because up next is Yisrael Hawkins bringing the inspired message coming straight from Yahweh to all the world, the only light in the world in these last days. For all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for joining us.